3, 2, 1, go.
Okay. So we have community interaction. What are community interactions? Community defines all the populations of multiple species living and interacting with one another. An interspecific competition is going to be between two or more species that use the same resources. So you have an acorn woodpecker against other woodpeckers, jays, squirrels, and you can see these in multiple ecosystems and communities where multiple animals fight for food and other resources. On consumer-prey interactions, one species uses another species as food source. Like this crocodile, for example, will eat other animals. That's going to be consumer-prey interactions. Mutualism. Pretty nice. Two species cooperate in a way that increases both species' access to resource. So you have an Egyptian plover and a crocodile as an example. So I believe this is your little Egyptian plover in the crocodile's mouth. If somebody could look up how it's mutualistic, we shall see. With symbiosis, prolonged and intimate relationship can be mutualism or parasitism. So it can be parasitism if a deer tick and a host. So if a tick attaches to its host, it can, like for example, you have like regular ticks. If they like attach to you, you can get Lyme disease. That's the sort of like parasitism. Coevolution. Interacting species act as agents of natural selection on one another. So lodgepole pincone and red squirrel is an example. So community interaction. Influences of ecological niche. So you have an ecological niche which encompasses all aspects of a species' way of life. This is their habitat, nesting or denning sites, their temperature, climate, nutrients, water, pH, salinity, and shade and sun. So this is their way of life and the places in which they live. Competitive exclusion principle. Two species with exactly the same niche cannot coexist indefinitely. So if we have two birds that like want to live on top of the tree right here, they can't do that forever because eventually one is going to take precedence. Resource partitioning. So they divvy up resources is often the outcome of this coevolution of different species with extensive niche overlap. So these birds are going to divvy up the species between each other so that they do not lose access to the species altogether. So consumer-prey interactions. So predators are free-living organisms that eat other organisms. We're predators because we eat other organisms. Parasites live in or on its prey. So if you look at stuff like malaria is like a parasite, right? It's going to live inside of you. Predators and prey co-evolve, counteracting adaptations. This is an example of keen eyesight in a hawk and earthy colors of a mouse. So this is the predator. It's going to use its keen eyesight to be able to locate the mouse and eat it, the hawk. But the earthy colors that the mouse has on its coat, it's going to help it blend into the tree so that it does not get eaten so easily. Predator-prey may produce defensive mechanisms. So, for example, milkweeds synthesize toxic and distasteful chemicals to deter predators. So that's just one example. I think it's also, I remember reading something about butterflies being like disgusting or whatever. So that's why a lot of animals don't eat them because they can be toxic. Camouflage make plants and animals inconspicuous, and this is what this little mouse is using so that it doesn't get eaten. But another example is going to be thorn tree hopper insects that avoid detection by resembling thorns. Consumer-prey interactions continue. There's going to be warning coloration. It's to visualize the fence that indicates that they may taste bad. Exactly as I said, monarch butterfly and caterpillars, they don't taste good and they can be toxic. Mimicry also refers to a situation in which members of a species evolve to resemble another species. Caterpillars and adult viceroys store salicylic acid that deters predators, but since viceroys and monarchs have similar features, then predators will likely avoid both. This viceroy butterfly is going to look like this monarch butterfly because the monarch butterfly doesn't taste good and can be toxic. The viceroy adapts itself to look similar to the monarch, so its predators cannot tell the difference. Consumer-prey interactions. You have startle correlations that indicate some vertebrates have the same color patterns that closely resemble the eyes of a much larger animal. This one right here, example, false-eyed frog, This looks kind of scary. It could look like a crocodile if the animal's not looking correctly. Peacock mouth, eastern tiger, swallowtail, butterfly. So these are a lot of animals that use different mechanisms to throw off other animals. So excessive mimicry helps some predators entice their prey to come close by resembling something attractive. So this a startle coloration can be used by prey, but then excessive mimicry can also be used by predators. So examples can be a species of fireflies use the rhythm of flashes that typically is used to lure mates to attract and kill and eat males. I didn't know that. That's pretty interesting. Frogfish dangles a lure that resembles a small fish by its mouth in order to attract other fish. So these are ways in which animals are able to attract other animals with either different mechanisms like light, a mimicry. I know for my species diversity, a flower used the way it was shaped to be able to entice animals, get pollinated, not so much to consume the animals, but there was just one other example. Consumer prey interactions continued. We go into parasites. So parasites evolve with their host. Mammals secrete antimicrobial molecules and produce white blood cells, secrete antibodies to regulate infected cells. In response, these microbes form biofilms to protect against antimicrobial and invade and kill immune cells. So that is how parasites can evolve with their host. The reduction of cells, antibodies, and regulation of infected cells. So that's how something like malaria can live inside your body for a while and can flare up at certain times. So another example, consumer prey interactions. Now we go into mutualism, which is pretty cool. So we can go into how it can be symbiotic. So protists and bacteria find food and shelter in an intestine, breaking down cellulose for cattle and termites and producing vitamins for humans. So as we talked about methanogens, and they are, I think it's a type of bacteria that can help cows be able to digest. Another example can be clownfish that live in anemones for protection and provide anemones with food and clean it in exchange. So that is a symbiotic relationship. So we have, by contrast, a non-symbiotic relationship. Plants and animals that pollinate on them. So these non-symbiotic relationships are not going to be long-lasting relationships. These plants are pollinated by animals, feed on nectar, but this relationship is not long-lasting or intimate. It is because sometimes these animals can find other food sources. Other times there can be things that kill these animals, and there's a lot of factors depending on how mutualistic this relationship could be. So Keystone Species. What's a Keystone Species? A Keystone Species plays a major role in determining community structure. So they're species that can, once removed, they can cause a lot of consequences. Keystone species are removed, computer interactions are significantly altered. So for example, we have the bush elephant that grazes on small trees, and the wolves and cougars that maintain the population of deer and elk. So if wolves are killed in mass, they can end up letting the population of deer and elk multiply, and then that can cause overgrazing with those animals. So because wolves and cougars exist, they prevent the overgrazing, so small animals have food, shelter, and nesting sites. So let's go more into species interaction and how it can change communities. Communities develop in stages called succession. So succession is gradual change in community and is non-living environment in which groups of species replace one another at a reasonably predictable sequence. So what are the steps of succession? So pioneers, which are like the first to cultivate the environment, they can alter the environment in ways that are favorable. The subclimax stages occur if recurring disturbances maintain a community in earlier stages. A climax community is achieved as succession progresses. So we have two forms of succession. One is primary and one is secondary. So what is primary succession? It's going to go into this picture. So you have, I'm going to leave this on a little bit so you can kind of see. So you have primary succession occurs when a community gradually forms in a location where there are no remnants of a previous community. So this is going to be bare rock. There's nothing on this rock. But then you have lichens that are going to develop here, and they're going to be the roots for these trees later on. And then you have small annual plants and lichens, so more little plants, more foliage, grasses, and perennials. And this is over the course of 100 years. Grasses and shrubs and shade-intolerant trees such as pines. And then we're going to go into a climax community where shade-tolerant trees such as oak and hickory grow. And now we have an entire community of plants and also animals later on. So this is going to be caused by an example of a volcanic eruption. So this is where you're going to have that bare rock where nothing's growing, nothing's living. And then that is where primary succession will have occurred because we need a pioneer species that grows into a climax community. Now we're going to have secondary succession, and by contrast, that is very different. You have wildfires, right? That is able to consume these trees, and they leave a lot of ashes. But however, you still have remnants of this pioneer species that was there before. So this species, the remnants, become annual plants, grasses, and perennials, and they're going to continue almost like a primary succession, but they have that species that was there before them to jumpstart the process. And as you can see, this is going to be over the course of 100 years because it is very new. It's starting from the ground. Hundreds of years, and by contrast, a secondary succession, like this can transform within 200 years rather because it already had its roots and its foundation. Still, you can see the roots of these trees and everything. So you can see that the ecosystem is simply just growing back from where it was planted before. You have a basis for your foundation. That is where secondary succession can be successful. So subclimax stages. So some ecosystems are maintained in subclimax stages. So tall grass prairie in Missouri and Illinois can become deciduous forest. So you see this prairie can often grow into forestial land if given the chance. But periodic fires can retain them in a subclimax stage. So sometimes they can never grow into these forests that you can see in the background because you have these incidents of fires, and most times they're on purpose to maintain grazing grounds for bison. So there's another example of succession. Choose either primary success or secondary succession to provide an example. And that is the end of our community interactions. Thank you for watching.
That was good.